Welcome back to our continued discussion of intended learning outcomes. We've been talking about different domains that we want our learners to attain, whether those are cognitive domains or skill domains. And so another model that many people are familiar with is the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. So briefly, the Dreyfus model was created by brothers Stewart and Hubert from the University of California at Berkeley under a United States Air Force contract. Stewart is actually a Department of Industrial Engineering and Operations Research faculty member, and Hubert was in the Department of Philosophy. The original document of the Dreyfus model from 1980 is listed in the syllabus, and that will be the basis for my discussion today. I'm of the belief that if you go back to the original source, then you can learn the underlying theory and figure out how it applies to your context. Because there have been many iterations and discussions around the Dreyfus model, but I thought I would back us all the way up to the original. So the point of the Dreyfus model is that it's a developmental model that explains how one develops a skill. And so what are the mental tasks that somebody goes through in order to develop the skill of doing something? And so in the model that they created, they talk about, well, how does someone learn a foreign language? Or how does someone learn chess? Or because they were working for the United States Air Force, they were also talking about flight instruction and pilots who were learning how to fly. So there's a couple of underlying assumptions of the Dreyfus model that I believe are important to remember. The first is that an individual acquires a skill through both instruction and experience. So you can't just tell someone how to do something. They actually need to experience the performance of the skill. It's a developmental process, and they define 5 different stages that individuals move through as they learn the skill. They base their analysis on careful descriptions of skill acquisition, and so one of the critiques is that they actually don't have specific data, and because there's no data, then many of their assumptions and their conclusions have been criticized. And I'll let you decide if those critiques are valid, etc. But the other really important piece that the Dreyfuses talk about is that as the student becomes skilled, he or she depends less on abstract principles and more on concrete experience. So let's see what this means. So basically they talk about from moving from novice to a mastery level, that there's a shift from controlled processing of information, so cognitive function, that requires attention and requires somebody to actually go through the specific movements because they're not as proficient or skilled. And as they get better, they're moving towards automatic processing. So there's less cognitive attention that's required, and you easily complete the task because you are more skilled and or proficient at it. And again, as you shift towards this automatic processing, your performance basically improves, and you free up your cognitive attention to engage in a parallel task. So a very good example is tying your shoe. So think about when you're a new learner and how you have to really concentrate to figure out how many loops to make, which loop goes over the top, which loop goes over the bottom or under the bottom, and how slowly that takes you. Now think about how you tie your shoe now, right? It's an automatic thing for you. You don't have to think about it. You have an automaticity, and you can do multiple things while tying your shoes. However, the challenge as a teacher is if you try to slow down and break up the components of tying one's shoe or trying to teach someone how to tie their shoe, it actually takes a lot more cognitive energy, and you have to break it into its component steps so that the individual can understand what it is you're doing. So another way to look at this is that concrete experience is required to attain higher levels of performance. So we can talk all about how one should tie a shoe, but until somebody actually ties a shoelace, they're not going to be able to perform that task over and over and over with proficiency and with automaticity. If you provide an abstraction, that actually makes the task a little bit harder to perform. So You could hearken back to our discussions about adult learners, how it actually makes more sense if something is grounded in what you actually understand or what you intend to do. Many of us have memories of story problems that just didn't make any sense until you actually took 5 pennies and 5 dimes and worked through the math about how much money you actually would have. The other thing that's really important to think about is that training programs and materials should support the learner through these stages of learning and these stages of acquisition. So that if you have a novice learner, trying to get them to do a task that you would consider at a mastery level may put too much strain on the system. And again, I think about Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development and making sure that that gap is supported and that you're scaffolding people through their development. So the Dreyfus model basically talks about 5 different stages: the novice stage, competence, proficiency, expertise, and mastery. Now again, in the literature you will see many combinations of this. You'll see modifications. The nursing literature has modifications of the Dreyfus model, but this is from their original document. And so they're really talking about mental models for skill acquisition. So in stage 1, when someone is a novice, the task has context-free features, meaning you learn to make a loop, no matter where you're making a loop. You could be tying a boat, you could be tying a shoe, but you learn to make a loop. So this task is just a free-form task. It's non-situational. And there are general rules or principles that you use to sort of put these tasks together. But when you are in the novice stage, you actually need monitoring. You need somebody to help you. You need somebody to make sure that you're doing it correctly. As you move through to stage 2, you become more competent, and you are able to put the tasks together into a situational component. You have aspect recognition, or you recognize recurrent patterns. So you can tie a shoe, you can tie a boot, you can tie an ice skate. You recognize that all of these things involve tying. And that you also have guidelines for action. So if we're talking about clinical competence, then you may want to switch your paradigm, like Dreyfus and Dreyfus does, to a pilot. And so when you have a proficient pilot in stage 3, that individual has been exposed to sort of the whole act of flying a plane, and they have maxims, or these memorized principles of what it means to fly, what it means to land on an aircraft carrier. And that individual who is proficient has a mental model of being able to judge the importance of the salient aspects of the task. So they may be able to understand the wind speed, or the way that the boat is drifting because of the waves. And because they're proficient, they're able to put all of the information together and land the plane appropriately. You could argue that that is also part of expertise, or stage 4. Dreyfus and Dreyfus talk about how an expert has sort of this intuitive, appropriate action. They include all the rules, guidelines, maxims, and create an appropriate response to whatever context they're in without actually thinking about it. So many people have had the experience of driving down a highway and not actually being aware that you're physically driving the car, right? You're not thinking about how much am I turning the wheel or how much pressure am I putting on the gas, but all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm actually driving a car. Again, very simplified explanations, and I want you to get the big picture and apply it to your own environment. And so I'm intentionally being generic, okay? And then stage 5, the final stage that Dreyfus and Dreyfus talk about, is this mastery, where you have an automaticity, where you don't even think about what it is you're doing. You have an intuitive response. So again, I'm an obstetrician. When I think about delivering a baby and where sort of I put my hands as I'm doing a delivery, students always ask me, well, which hand are you using? How do you know sort of which way to turn or how much pressure to put? And in truth, I don't think about it specifically when I'm doing the task. But if I'm trying to teach someone, I have to slow down and break it down into its components. Many athletes will talk about sort of being in the zone, where they are able to just see the basket and they're able to just hit shot after shot after shot because they're not thinking, they're not cognitive, they're just having this automaticity. So it's important to think about the transitions through these different stages that the Dreyfuses explain. And I wanted to provide this quote because I think it will serve as a basis for sort of my philosophy about which instructional methods to use, how to support our learners. And the important thing is that the designer of training aids and courses must at all times be aware of the developmental stage of the student so that you can help them get to the next stage and to try and avoid adding things that are really sophisticated or lots of bells and whistles to try to help them improve their performance when you actually may stifle their development if you make them reach too far. So this concludes our section on intended learning outcomes. There will be some forum questions as well as some thought questions to help you think about how can I put these sort of rubrics of understanding of cognitive assessments and outcomes and skill assessments and outcomes into my own personal context. See you soon.